No, I hit the button. Yeah, I'm in the middle of watching a couple of videos, so I'll comment on them. And maybe I'll do this in pieces because some of this might get awful boring if I played any of it. But here's Professor Anton and Matt, Thou Art That. And so I'm 15 minutes into that video. And it's just, ironically, Matt is conceding, that it almost appears like things are obeying rules and laws in how they're behaving, which implies a certain kind of mechanics. It implies it like overtly, directly stating it as loudly as possible. And that much of our statistically we fall into patterns, and those patterns, like almost like weather systems. We reveal ourselves, and much of this conversation is about some sort of goop, about some sort of godly goop of some kind, some sort of universe doing something besides that. Like there's some sort of thing out there that's doing something, an agent that doesn't an agent that doesn't do anything but obey the laws of physics. Just because they need something. And so then you're just talking really about what are humans doing. Have humans figured out how to be human? In the sense of, now we can do this thinking thing, this rational, recognize the game, we're in the maze, and now instead of just running the maze, we can understand the maze. And we can understand these very patterns. We can see the predictability of some of our behavior. We can recognize what we're after. We can identify, like Freud, we can identify some sort of ego thing inside of us, some sort of the mechanisms of our ambition, the mechanisms of our desire. Why are we hierarchical? And then we can look at other mammals and we can say, oh, I see, it's an alpha-beta thing. It's part of evolution. That's why we strive and compete. Why do we have those elements in our psychology? And, where they fail dismally is just not to recognize that this is the problem. I mean, human beings have to recognize the maze they're running correctly. And if you believe in a god or you make up some other kind of bullshit, you're not going to recognize the maze we're running and why we're running it. Why does the rat chase the cheese? So they just missed that. And part of it, I'd say they missed. Part of it is, I think, they don't want to go there because they know if they go the truth is going to be very humiliating. It's going to basically just say, yeah, we're just a penis chasing pussy, and there's not much else going on here. And we can pretend there's a lot going on, but there's really not a lot going on. It's a crude game we're playing, and we have these very precious commodities playing this very crude game, and it's very inefficient. And if we were really going to use our intelligence, we'd recognize that we have to make it cleaner or we can't play it. It's way too dirty a stinking cesspool for us to jump in there with our little rubber duckies and say, let's play. It's just not good enough. Not anywhere close to good enough. And there's every indication that it can never be good enough because human beings are fundamentally incapable of doing what needs to be done, which is to point at each other and say, asshole. So anyway, moving on. Hythloday has made some sort of response video, so I figure this ought to be worth a laugh. But I can't play it and respond because it'll probably be it'll take a half an hour to get to 3 minutes of content. 2 minutes, maybe. I don't know. Let's see how long it is. Oh, it's only 9 minutes, so that's good.
Okay. In answer to Inmendham.
Yeah, let's hear
Inmendham believes himself to be illogical when he constructs this table. This is Inmendham's concrete illustration of the Benatar argument.
Yeah, which basically is the Venetians are not being harmed by not existing. Yeah, That's the argument. You have a counter argument to that? That harm and not having fun are not the same thing. Can you understand that? Being harmed and not having some shining city on the hill is not the same thing. Anyway, let's not do it. I'll just play it and then get back to it. We can see where it's going, which is nowhere. He refuses to understand that not having fun is not a bad thing if you don't need to have fun. And that harm, having a very bad time, is bad. That is where bad happens. This is the example of the human organism that just can't get over itself. It says, I'm addicted to heroin, therefore heroin is good. What do you do with that? There's nothing you can do with that. So anyway, till later. Next time. I'll play some more Anton, and then I'll play some more of this rubbish. Alright, we're back. So back to Professor Anton and Matt. But they're not really going anywhere. Life is not easy to reconcile or understand. So we're back to Professor Anton's ambiguity argument. So he's been making that consistently for the whole time he's been on YouTube. He's talked about this ambiguity thing. That there's some, like I said, that there's something we can't figure out. There's something we can't understand. We can't somehow put in a, recognize these puzzle pieces, put them together, resolve the image, and say, that's what we have here. It's a mechanism. It's evolution. It constructs machines that compete in environments, and they'll compete a certain way because it has certain advantages. And depending on how that evolution goes, they could evolve into all kinds of monstrosities. And you could list all kinds of animals that, do their killing in insidious ways. The wasp that lays its eggs inside the caterpillar, really disgusting things. And I can give you examples of potential evolution where, say, an organism would actually breed its prey. Where it would actually, wolves would produce little rabbits, and it would allow the little rabbits to grow up and then eat them, and just as a beehive, you could say, or a wasps, or ants, lots of colony, termites, insects that basically breed the colony to service basically just the king and queen. I mean, it's even more insidious than human monarchies in the sense that these creatures are entire and complete slaves. I mean, the slavery goes all the way into their genetic code. I mean, they are slaves by genetics. This is abhorrent to, animals like us who hate being tied and would hate to have a leash on us and a chain on us and be tied to a tree or something like that. We'd find that pretty abhorrent, from how we've developed in the environment, our comfort zone. It'd be like living underwater or something. We'd find it just, we'd suffocate in such an environment. But anyway, I mean, this idea that we can't understand function. We understand lineage, understand there's a maze, it's a game we're playing, and we're playing it because we have an internal mechanism that compels us to play it. These are the ingredients of life, this little fluffy word. These people are still playing with it as if it's a fluffy word, as if this is clearly and without question some sort of brilliant phenomenon. This 4 billion year gladiator war that they're saying is magnificent. I mean, if I drew up this equation in German, okay, and put a little Hitler mustache on it, of this plan of mine to spend 4 billion years engineering the master monster, they'd get it. But they're not going to get it because it doesn't have a Hitler mustache, and so without a Hitler mustache they can't understand. But it's the same servitude, it's the same, diminishment. You people are diminishing the precious commodities, and you are elevating the crude forces, which is hilarious. The crude forces are gods, and the precious commodities are to be ground up in service to the God of life. That's how I see it, fellas. So anyway, we're about 23 minutes in, and it's just now they're going to start talking about rituals, prayer rituals and such. Yes, just no different than some sort of psychological masturbation. That's what that's called, okay? It's something people should do in their bathrooms. Yeah, their rituals. Anyway, I mean, this is just so, I'm finding this game, this is like playing like Chutes and Ladders with a 6-year-old or something. I mean, this isn't philosophy. This isn't at all challenging. Alright, so now Hythloday. So he plays the same old game. So now he calls this arbitrary, which is really stupid. And then he goes through it, and then he just circles the little words he wants to emphasize, and he just ignores the equal sign and good, and the equal sign and not bad. And then he says this has to be a risk equation is what this is, when it's not. It's definitions. That's what these are. These are definitions, Hythloday. These are the premises. This is the logical implication, but it's also a type of premise. There's equal signs here. These are declarations. That's what an equal sign means. It's a declaration. Alright, so it's not a risk equation, and you don't do any probability study on this itself. This is just setting you up with what your values are. So harm is bad. That's a definition. Fun is good. That's a definition. Not harm is good. So we've now established that when you don't do this harm thing, okay, the harm is bad, it's a negative one, but when you don't do it, you have an inverse, you have a plus one. So when you don't harm something, it turns that into a fun, and that turns it into a plus. So that's what this declaration is emphasizing. And then this one is the asymmetry. Not fun does not equal the inverse of bad. So unlike not harm equals good, not fun does not equal bad. It equals not bad if you're in the dead state. So the state here is alive, the state here is dead. And that's the asymmetry, okay, is that you don't have the commensurate reversal of the values when you take away fun from a dead person. Okay, but when you don't have the person and spare them the harm, that's a good. But the fun you deny them is not bad. Bad and good are not reciprocals. They're made of something different. But at the same time, the inverse of harm is the good. So that's the catch, right? Good can be derived in two ways for the living. By having fun and by taking away a harm. So we can understand that. We can understand that me having a big pot of chocolate pudding right now would be very good. And if I had a knife in my side, it would be excellent to have that pulled out and to have the wound healed. So we can understand that having a deprivation or a satisfied, well, I won't say deprivation because that implies a negative, but to have some sort of joyous experience, some sort of what seems like a free lunch show up is a good. And it's also a good to have some burden relieved. That both of those are two ways to generate a good, where there's only one way to generate a bad. And he just won't get that part. So, anyway, till next time. Sorry, there's two video things at once is probably a bit silly, but just happened to be the mood I was in. I just wasn't in the mood for an hour of Professor Anton and Matt, so I just thought breaking it up might make it a little more tolerable. I don't know whether it really did that or not, but that's the way it worked out, so that's what we're going with. So I'll see you in a bit. time dilation will be really short bit for you. It'll be a much longer bit for me. Yeah, back again. Not really much progress. So we're at 32 minutes. Hopefully maybe I'll do the one more. So they didn't really say anything, so I'm gonna say something instead. A paraphrase that's not going to be exactly what they're saying, but sort of related, I guess, is, they got into the subject of these rituals, these prayers or whatever, and then just this idea of, how are we reacting, and time, whether we exist in this moment or we exist in, a collection of moments, and they didn't really get into the significance of that recognition that life isn't this moment, it is a series of moments. And you have to count all of them if you're going to sum up. But anyway, so I use the term seeking control. Is what we're really doing. We're seeking to exercise power. And most people are doing that through some hope mechanism. That's all religion is. It's basically some desperate mechanism of control. I can't stop it. I'll beg something to give me a stick. I'll beg something to give me a weapon. I'll beg something to make me capable of controlling it. And that's all it is. That's pretty much all religion is a desperate hope. And all this goop, about underlying function or purpose is just more of this hope crap. Like there's some redeeming force in the universe that will resolve, and that somehow there'll be clarity in function. No evidence of that going to happen. So we got into command and obedience was some of the rhetoric Professor Anton used. And that, we're just on cause and effect now. We're back to the basic mechanism. And I've said many times that we're just knee jerk. We're just really big jerk. Lots of jerk. That's all our brain is. It's a bunch of knee jerks. It's a bunch of little knees inside of your frickin' brain, right? And they just knee jerk, knee jerk, knee jerk, knee jerk all over the place. Everything we hear, see, computate. It's just little jerks, little knee-jerk reactions to everything. Everything has a knee-jerk reaction. You say one word, it's word association. All the little jerky knees start jerking all over the place. It's all just jerking off. It's all big, giant jerk, jerk, jerk all over the place. It's all just one big jerk. And but yeah, it appears like we think. We're thinking, we're jerking. I mean, that's what it is. And, garbage in, garbage out, blah, 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 blah. But, yeah. But the game, we're still looking at a game, all right? This is we're in something, and what we're trying to do, these guys are supposed to be trying to do, what they're pretending to be doing, is explaining the game to you. But they're not talking about the game. They're not, this isn't a real conversation about anything real. They're not accounting for that this is just mechanics, that these associations are mechanics, these realizations are mechanics. It's all mechanical, and that's all it is. And they're going to just keep pretending, even though there's absolutely not one shred of evidence for the non-mechanical. They're going to just keep talking as if somehow it's the water comes out of the magic spigot and flows down the magic trellis to the magic end, singularity thingy. And somehow it's all just somehow magical. So anyway, Hythloday. Violated about 7 million rational rules here. So he's still saying this is arbitrary, and you're just like, okay, well, I don't know how I can explain it any clearer to you. So he says, okay, I can just make up my own chart. So he makes up a chart that says not harm equals 0. So that basically is saying that if I have an experiment, with little rodents in it, and the cost of the experiment is the rodents suffer horribly, and so there's argument about whether I should conduct this experiment. Now the truth is the experiment doesn't have any value. Okay, it's just figuring out how thick a piece of paper is or something, and there's a really simple way to figure out how thick the paper is. You just measure it. And instead I have a bunch of rodents getting ground up, and I'm using rodent mush to weigh the paper or some kind of bullshit. Now he would argue that if I discontinue the experiment, I have spared no mice harm. Even though it's quite obvious that all those mice that were ground up and smushed and horribly treated would obviously not experience all that harm. Okay, the meat grinder is off, no meat is going into it, and he's going to say there's no value redeemed. So if you prevent an earthquake and you prevent people from suffering in the earthquake, it's worth nothing. And so I'm supposed to take that seriously as a premise. That's what these are, Hythloday, equal signs. These are premises, 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 premises. You're saying the premise is avoiding harm, preventing a harm, is worth nothing. I'm supposed to take your numbers seriously. Well, I can't take that seriously. So then he went on to take cheap shots at the rest of the philosophy as if I'm just saying things rather than defending things and arguing in defense of things logically, and that's just a ad hom, unsubstantiated accusation. I mean, you have no counter theory. Your counter theory is preventing harm has no value. That's your counter theory. Well, I say it's a nonsensical, made-up pile of nothing. That's absolutely nonsensical. But again, I can't prove to you that sensations come in two varieties, good and bad. I can't prove that to you. I have personal experience with it, so I know it. Apparently you're not conscious, so you don't understand that. I would like to not die in an earthquake. I would prefer it substantially over dying in an earthquake. You don't understand that as a premise, as a rock-solid foundation upon which to build value equations? Fine. We don't have anything to discuss. I'm sorry. I can't make you conscious. I can't make you aware of horrible things that can happen terribly horribly and things that can happen not horribly. I can't explain to you the difference between those two things. You have to know what horrible is. And if you don't know what horrible is, and you don't know that avoiding horrible is good, I can't help you. Okay, you're too alien, too distant from what I am for me to explain that to you. It's something you really have to taste. You really have to taste suffering to know that it's good to avoid it. I can't make it any simpler than that. To really know how good it is not to suffer, you have to know what suffering is. And apparently you don't, so I can't help you. Sorry, buddy. Not harm equals 0. Anyway, till next time. Alright, summing up, completing, finishing. Alright, so Anton started off with some commentary about aliens and, what they would, if they believed in multiple gods, that somehow people would follow along or something. I don't know, it didn't make much sense. Then there was some argument, some conversation about, one God bad, many gods good or something. And then they conceded, okay, gods don't really do anything, and God is imagination. Okay, so everybody can, okay, God is imagination. Well, imagination isn't really imagination, right? It's that whole knee-jerky thing. But, okay, let's say there is such a thing as imagination. That we aren't just building on top of what we've already learned, you know what I mean? You learn how to make steel, and now you can do all kinds of neat things with steel. You learn how to make asphalt, now you can make all kinds of roads, and, it's not really imagination. You're just building on things and putting them together and saying, hey, look, we can make that work better. Hey, look, we can do a little bit better. Hey, we can cut a little bit off that and make the point a little sharper. Not that interesting, really. But let's just concede imagination is all neato cool. The real question is when is it fantasy and when is it science? They're conceding that imagination is part of how we made science. That's what science does. It imagines, and then it solidifies it and proves it and demonstrates and all that kind of stuff. And, or it's just fantasy. It's just, jerking off again. We're back to just telling yourself stories you want to hear rather than stories that are the truth. coming up with a scheme, okay, a plan of action. It doesn't have to be coherent to the truth. You're just imagining a way of getting, 50 million people to buy a pet rock because you can make money off of it, right? Or some other kind of agenda. So then it all came down to, in the end, the conversation, which is a good way to end. We need a new ethics. That's what Matt would argue, and Professor Anton likewise. But a new ethics based on what? It's just this daydream that everything can be all right if we just get rid of this, capitalism or something. Yeah, it'd be better, but we're still animals. We're still got the agenda problem. The agenda problem. And, there's this description of your heaven, your singularity, your beautiful place, whatever it is, whatever this thing is, this fantasy of utopia that we could head towards, or good, super cool place. Awesome, double awesome. Professor Anton would say we're already in the awesome. And so, he'd just rather we get to double awesome. Why don't you give me a description of double awesome first, and then I'll try to explain why I don't want to go there, or why you're not going to get there. Not with this plan. The problem is, most of the problems are in us. They're not in the world. That's the game. It's all these little knee jerks are a bunch of asshole jerks, and you're going to have to change all the jerks. But the bottom line is why would you bother? Are you really doing anything but knee jerking? I mean, is it really that important to have jerks in the universe? I don't think you can logically defend it. So I don't think you can scientifically use your imagination to come up with some sort of theory on how all this works out. You can only use your imagination to come up with stories and fantasies and bullshit to deceive people into buying your pet rock. But it's a pet rock. It's love. That's Matt's answer. God is love. Goo goo gaga. Yeah. Goo goo gaga. There, I'm a philosopher. Goo goo gaga gaga goo goo. Yeah, philosophy. Anyway, moving on to, yes. Hythloday is hopeless. So anyway, he says, I've created inadequate proof here. I haven't demonstrated that not creating harm is a good thing. It's not obvious. It's not intrinsically true. It's not apparent. It's not suitable for a premise statement. Somehow I have to logically demonstrate it. Well, I can't really do that. Not fun equaling bad, not bad, which is the zero. So not having fun isn't a bad thing. So not having a cupcake is not the same thing as having a knife stuck in your colon. Those two things aren't comparable. One deprivation does not equal the other deprivation in terms of magnitude or character or anything. Okay, an unsatisfied unneed is really nowhere close to having a knife in your liver. So, yeah, that's, look, he circled it. He says this is not, it's ludicrous, my expectation that people could understand this. That I'm stepping way beyond the bounds for people to understand that. And what they really understand is not harming is useless. Preventing harm is the stupidest, moronicest idea ever invented. I mean, it's just absolutely ludicrous. And I have to come up with some kind of evidence that preventing harm is somehow a good thing. I mean, I'm being sarcastic, but I mean, you can't laugh at this hard enough, really. I mean, he's claiming I have failed when this is what he comes to the table with. Prevention isn't a good. That's his argument. Preventing harm isn't a good. So there's just no, there's nothing, I can't say anything, right? Yeah, I'm not handling the criticism, he says. How do I handle this as a counter argument? There's no way I can handle that as a counter argument. How can I possibly without showing you my feelings or showing you the pain, how could I possibly explain to you that not having horrible pain is a good thing? I mean, I don't know how I can logically convey that to you without you. You have to understand horrible pain, and you have to understand how horrible it is. I don't know. What can I say to you? You don't care. So I'd love to do the experiments and see how much you can't tell the difference. I'd love to have the cupcake knife experiment, and we can see if you can't tell the difference. If you think it's 0. I'm sorry, this is ludicrous. I'm being challenged by insanity. This is not an insane challenge. This is not a sane criticism. And and again, yes, obviously the truth has been difficult for the human race. So he's making this, he's almost mocking this challenge I'm presenting as if, okay, look how you're failing. You can do this for 100 years and blah 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 blah. And yes, sometimes it takes an awful long time. Darwin is over 100 and whatever years old, 100 something, and still most of the American population hasn't gotten it. I'd say even most of Europe hasn't really gotten it. I mean, they don't really understand evolution. They've accepted it, but they've augmented it to their preferences. It's hard to get human beings to grow up. Hythloday. That's not my fault. And yes, I'm going to strive to attempt to come up with the improved argument, just as preventing harm is good, improving an argument is good. And so I'm going to try to improve the argument. And yes, that's my ambition. And maybe that'll work. I think that's a reasonable plan. Hoping doesn't seem to be a reasonable plan. Wishing doesn't seem to be a reasonable plan. But the expectation that maybe I can do better seems reasonable. So anyway, generally speaking, fuck you. Yeah, really. So anyway, until next time. Really was entertaining. Well, what is this? I don't think you're giving any arguments here either. Well, why are you saying either, guy? I mean, my argument is there. His argument is insane. Jeez. Anyway. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I'm not, I don't mean to. Obviously, we all say things not the right way. They say, oh, you don't look too fat today. That's, you don't really mean to say it that way. You don't look as fat today. That's not really the way I wanted to say that. Anyway, I think we're done. So anyway, I do want to do some of these. I like the idea of the live conversation thing. This dialogue between Matt and Professor Anton. It seems like a reasonable mechanism to do these kind of things. So if somebody has Skype and they want to do this shit, let me know. I'm available. And I do have the debate room every Saturday, but that is a little bit harder a context. But I do want to make that into something. And I do want to try to have quality moments in there where I actually record it and video it and such. But I haven't got there yet. So anyway, that's a video, I think.